be able to deal with this, but anyone could answer this. My concern is that when we're dealing with Syria, the focus seems to be on Russia in Syria or ISIS in Syria, and we're losing track of the movement of Iran through Iraq into Syria. We're losing track of what's happening in Yemen and other places. What is your perception of Iran's goal through the Middle East? Is their goal higher for Yemen, or is it higher going into Syria and into Iraq and to be able to occupy and stay? And is the perception that the Russians want to remain there, or Iran wants to remain in Syria and be the dominant force there?
Clearly, Iran views themselves as the dominant regional power. They will continue to use militia forces and asymmetric forces to achieve the aims of controlling large parts of the region. If they can't control them physically, they tend to influence them politically. Syria becomes a very key strategic point for them. It allows them to leverage the Syrian forces, Lebanese Hezbollah, and move capability and forces across the region. They will be in competition at some point with Russia. Russia views themselves as the regional power, at least the dominant regional power today. I'm not sure that Russian and Iran's influence will remain aligned in the long term. In the near term, they're very closely aligned as it relates to propping up and securing the Syrian regime.
Thank you.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. I really appreciate it. And I know that, Mr. McCabe, you seem to be of great interest in being here. And we're going to look forward to really hearing from all of you all in a closed hearing this afternoon, which I think that we'll be able to get in more detail. So I appreciate that. I just have one question for Mr. McCabe, is basically the morale of the agency, the FBI agency, and the morale basically starting back from July 5th to July 7th, October 28th, November 6th, and Election Day. Did you all ever think you'd be embroiled in an election process such as this? And what did it do to the morale?
Well, I don't know that anyone envisioned exactly the way these things would develop. As I said earlier, Senator, we are a large organization. We have a lot of diversity of opinions and viewpoints on things. We are also a fiercely independent group.
I'm just saying that basically before July 5th, before the first testimony that basically Director Comey got involved in, prior to that, did you see a change in the morale? Just yes or no, yes, a change, or more anxious, more concerned?
I think morale has always been good. However, we had, there were folks within our agency who were frustrated with the outcome of the Hillary Clinton case, and some of those folks were very vocal about those concerns.
I'm sure we'll have more questions in the closed hearing, sir, but let me say that to the rest of you all, we talked about Kaspersky, the lab, KL lab. Do you all, has it risen to your level, being the head of all of our intelligence agencies and people that are mostly concerned about the security of our country, of having a Russian connection and a lab as far out-reaching as KL Labs? Has it come with your IT people coming to you, or have you gone directly to them, making sure that you have no interaction with KL or any of the contractors you do business with? Just down the line there, if you're Mr. Cardella.
Well, we count on the expertise of Admiral Rogers and the FBI to protect our systems, and so I value that.
You have IT people, right?
Absolutely.
Have you talked to the IT people? Has it come to your concern that there might be a problem?
I'm aware of the Kaspersky lab challenge and or threat.
Let me tell you, it's more of a challenge, more than a challenge, sir. And I would hope that, I'm go down the line, but I hope that all of you, we are very much concerned about this, very much concerned about security of our country because of their involvement.
We share that.
General?
We are tracking Kaspersky and their software. There is, as well as I know, and I checked this recently, no Kaspersky software on our networks.
Any contractor?
Now, the contractor piece might be a little bit harder to define, but at this point, we see no connection between Kaspersky and contractors supporting
Admiral Rogers.
our IT.
I'm personally aware and involved as the director of the National Security Agency on the Kaspersky lab issue. Yes, sir.
It wasn't that long ago I was sitting up there talking, raising issues about Kaspersky and its position here. And that continues in this new job.
It has risen to the director of the CIA as well, Senator Manchin.
Great.
Very concerned about it, sir, and we are focused on it closely.
Only thing I would ask all of you, if you can, give us a report back if you've swept all of your contractors to make sure they understand the certainty you have, concern that you have about this. and making sure that they can verify to you all that they're not involved whatsoever with any of Kaspersky's hardware. I'm going to switch to a couple of different things because of the national security, but you know, the violent gangs that we have in the United States, and I know we don't talk about it much. And when you talk about, you have MS-13, the Crips, you've got Hell's Angels, Aryan Brotherhood, it goes on and on and on. There's quite a few. What are we doing, and what is it to your level? Has it been brought to your level, the concern we have with these gangs within our country, really every part of our country? Anybody on the gangland?
Yeah, sir. So we spend a lot of time talking about that at the FBI. It's one of our highest priorities in
the
our
resources to
program.
go after each one of these because they're interspersed all over the country.
We do, sir. We've been focused on the gang threat for many years. Much like the online pharmacy threat, it continues to change and develop. We think it's likely having an impact on some of the elevated violent crime rates we see across the country. So we're spending a lot of time focused on that.
The one last question real quick, my time's running out, is basically on rare earth elements. I'm understanding ever since the closure of the California, which is the Mountain Pass mine, which was the last mine that we had that was giving us domestic source of rare earth elements, that's been closed, and now we're 100% dependent on basically foreign purchases of rare earth elements for what we need every day to run this country. We don't do any of it in this country anymore. Most of it comes from China. Do any of you have a concern about that?
So, Senator Manchin, I'll speak to that. Yes, we're concerned. We do a lot of work to figure out where they are and help the intelligence community, help the policy community shape policies surrounding how we ought to treat this issue. But it's a very real concern, and obviously depends on the element. But we use them for important technologies that keep us all safe. Those very rare earth elements.
Let me just say that it's been told to me that the Department of Defense needs about 800 tons of rare earth elements per year.
Yes,
and I want you to make sure that you know, West Virginia has the opportunity to provide this country with the rare earth elements it has because of our mining process and all of that we extract through the mining process. We are happy to come to aid, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Before I turn to Senator Cotton, can I say for members, the Vice Chair and I have to step out for a meeting that we can't push off. I would ask Senator Harris, Senator Cotton to complete their first round of questions. Any member that seeks additional questions will be recognized by the chair. I would ask you to limit those questions if you can, but the chair will say we're not going over 5 minutes for the second round of questions. It is my hope that we will give sufficient time to these 6 gentlemen to have some nutrition before we reconvene at 1:30 in 219. It's my understanding that there will be a vote circa 2 o'clock, and we will decide exactly how we handle that. But the closed hearings, we like to make sure that nobody misses anything, so we might slightly adjust what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman, just inquiry, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness. So in your departure, as we work through it, it's still acceptable to get another 5-minute round for those who
Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Senator Cotton.
The inmates are running the asylum. So I think everyone here in this room and most Americans have come to appreciate the aggressiveness with which Russia uses active measures or covert influence operations, propaganda, call them whatever you will, as your agencies assess they did in 2016 and hacking into those emails and releasing them, as news reports suggest they did in the French election last week. That's one reason why I sought to revive the Russian Active Measures Working Group in the FY17 Intelligence Authorization Act. These activities, though, go far beyond elections, I think, as most of our witnesses know. Former Director of the CIA, Bob Gates, in his memoir, From the Shadows, detailed Soviet covert influence campaigns designed to slow or thwart the U.S. development of nuclear delivery systems and warheads, missile defense systems, and deployment of intermediate-range nuclear forces systems to Europe. Specifically, on page 260 of his memoir, he writes, during the period, the Soviets mounted a massive covert action operation aimed at thwarting INF deployments by NATO. We at CIA devoted tremendous resources to an effort at the time to uncovering this Soviet covert campaign. Director Casey summarized this extraordinary effort in a paper he sent to Bush, Schultz, Weinberger, and Clark on January 18, 1983. We later published it and circulated it widely within the government and to the allies, and finally provided an unclassified version for the public to use, end quote. I'd like to thank the CIA for digging up this unclassified version of the document and providing it to the committee, Soviet Strategy to Derail U.S. INF Deployment, specifically undermining NATO solidarity in those deployments. I'd ask unanimous consent that it be included as part of the hearing transcript. And since the inmates are running the asylum, hearing no objection, we'll include it in the transcript. Director Pompeo, earlier this year, Dr. Rory Godson testified that he believed that Russia was using active measures and covert influence efforts to undermine our nuclear modernization efforts, our missile defense deployments, and the INF Treaty in keeping with these past practices. To the best of your ability in this setting, would you agree with the assessment that Russia is likely using such active measures to undermine U.S. nuclear modernization efforts and missile defenses?
Yes.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the FY17 Intelligence Authorization Act included 2 unclassified provisions that I authored. One would be restarting that old active measures working group. A second would require additional scrutiny of Russian embassy officials who travel more than the prescribed distance from their duty station, whether it's their embassy or a consulate around the United States. In late 2016, when that bill was on the verge of passing, I personally received calls from high-ranking Obama administration officials asking me to withdraw them from the bill. I declined. The bill did not pass. It passed last week as part of the FY17 spending bill. I did not receive any objection from Trump administration officials to include from our intelligence community. Director Coates, are you aware of any objection that the Trump administration had to my 2 provisions?
No, I'm not aware of any objection.
Director Pompeo?
None.
Do you know why the Obama administration objected to those 2 provisions in late 2016? I would add, after the 2016 presidential election?
Well, it'd be pure speculation. I couldn't read. I wasn't able to read the president's mind then, and I don't think I can read it now.
Thank you. I'd like to turn my attention to a very important provision of law I know that you've discussed earlier, Section 702. Director Rogers, it's my understanding that your agency is undertaking an effort to try to release some kind of unclassified estimate of the number of U.S. persons who might have been incidentally collected using 702 techniques. Is that correct?
So we're looking to see if we can quantify something that's of value to people outside the organization?
Would that require you going in and conducting searches of incidental collection that have been previously unexamined?
That's part of the challenge. How do I generate insight that doesn't, in the process of generating the insight, violate the actual tenets?
Well, I was going to say, you're trying to produce an estimate that is designed to protect privacy rights, but to produce that estimate, you're going to have to violate privacy rights?
That is a potential part of all of this.
Seems hard to do.
Yes, sir. That's why it has taken us a period of time, and that's why we're in the midst of a dialogue.
Is it going to be possible to produce that kind of estimate without some degree of inaccuracy or misleading information or infringing upon the privacy rights of Americans?
Probably not.
If anyone in your agency, or for that matter, Director McCabe in yours, believes that there is misconduct or privacy rights are not being protected, they could, I believe, under current law, come to your Inspector General, come to your General Counsel. I assume you have open door policies?
Whistleblower protections in addition, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And they can come to
They
you.
could come to this committee.
They come to the committee.
So at least 4 different avenues. I'm probably missing some if they believe there are any abuses in the Section 702 program.
And anyone in their chain of command.
Yeah.
I would ask that we proceed with caution before producing a report that might infringe on Americans' privacy rights needlessly, and that might make it even that much harder to reauthorize a critical program, something that Director McCabe, your predecessor last week, just characterized, if I can paraphrase, as a must-have program, not a nice-to-have program. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Harris.
Thank you. Acting Director McCabe, welcome. I know you've been in this position for only about 48 hours, and I appreciate your candor with this committee during the course of this open hearing.
Yes, ma'am.
Until this point, what was your role in the FBI's investigation into the Russian hacking of the 2016 election?
I've been the deputy director since February of 2016, so I've had an oversight role over all of our FBI operational activity, to
Including
include that
that one.
investigation.
And now that you're acting director, what will your role be in the investigation?
Very similar, a senior oversight role to understand what our folks are doing, to make sure they have the resources they need and are getting the direction and the guidance they need to go forward.
Do you support the idea of a special prosecutor taking over the investigation in terms of oversight of the investigation in addition to your role?
Ma'am, that is a question for the Department of Justice, and it wouldn't be proper for me to comment on that.
From your understanding, who at the Department of Justice is in charge of the investigation?
The Deputy Attorney General, who serves as acting Attorney General for that investigation, he is in charge.
And have you had conversations with him about the investigation since you've been in this role?
Yes, ma'am.
And when Director Comey was fired, my understanding is he was not present in his office. He was actually in California. So my question is, who was in charge of securing his files and devices when that information came down that he had been fired?
That's our responsibility, ma'am.
And are you confident that his files and his devices have been secured in a way that we can maintain whatever information or evidence he has in connection with the investigation?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
It's been widely reported, and you've mentioned this, that Director Comey asked Rosenstein for additional resources. And I understand that you're saying that you don't believe that you need any additional resources?
For the Russia investigation, ma'am, I think we are adequately resourced.
And will you commit to this committee that if you do need resources, that you will come to us, understanding that we would make every effort to get you what you need?
I absolutely will.
I understand that you've said that the White House, that you have not talked with the White House about the Russia investigation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Have you talked with Jeff Sessions about the investigation?
No, ma'am.
Have you talked with anyone other than Rod Rosenstein at the Department of Justice about the investigation?
I don't believe I have. Not recently. Obviously, not in the
last 48
not in this
hours?
position. No, ma'am.
Okay. What protections have been put in place to assure that the good men and women of the FBI understand that they will not be fired if they aggressively pursue this investigation?
Yes, ma'am. So we have very active lines of communication with the team that's working on this issue. They have some exemplary and incredibly effective leaders that they work directly for, and I am confident that they understand and are confident in their position moving forward on this investigation, as my investigators and analysts and professional staff are in everything we do every day.
And I agree with you. I have no question about the commitment that the men and women of the FBI have to pursue their mission. But will you commit to me that you will directly communicate in some way, now that these occurrences have happened and Director Comey has been fired? Will you commit to me that, given this changed circumstance, you will find a way to directly communicate with those men and women to assure them that they will not be fired simply for aggressively pursuing this investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And how do you believe we need to handle, to the extent that it exists, any crisis of confidence in the leadership of the FBI, given the firing of Director Comey?
I don't believe there is a crisis of confidence in the leadership of the FBI. I suppose that's somewhat self-serving, and I apologize for that. It was completely within the president's authority to take the steps that he did. We all understand that. We expect that he and the Justice Department will work to find a suitable replacement and a permanent director, and we look forward to supporting whoever that person is, whether they begin as an interim director or a permanently selected director. This organization in its entirety will be completely committed to helping that person get off to a great start and do what they need to do.
And do you believe that there will be any pause in the investigation during this interim period where we have a number of people who are in acting positions of authority?
No, ma'am. That is my job right now, to ensure that the men and women who work for the FBI stay focused on the threats, stay focused on the issues that are of so much importance to this country, continue to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And I will ensure that that happens.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator King. Second round, 5 minutes each. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the question I asked you, Director Pompeo. And I went out and reviewed the response that you gave to me, and of course what I'm concerned about is the Sally Yates warning to the White House that Michael Flynn could be blackmailed by the Russians. And you said you didn't have any first-hand indication of it. Did you have any indication, second-hand, any sense at all that the National Security Advisor might be vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians? That is a yes or no question.
It's actually not a yes or no question, Senator. I can't answer yes or no. I regret that I'm unable to do so. You have to remember this is a counterintelligence investigation that was largely being conducted by the FBI and not by the CIA. We're a foreign intelligence organization, and I'll add only this. I was not intending to be clever by using the term firsthand. I had no secondhand or thirdhand knowledge of that conversation either.
So with respect to the CIA, were there any discussions with General Flynn at all?
With respect to what, sir? He was for a period of time the National Security Advisor.
Topics that could have put at risk the security and the well-being of the American people. I mean, I'm just finding it very hard to swallow that you all had no discussions with the National Security Advisor.
No, I spoke with the National Security Advisor. He was the National Security Advisor. He was present for the daily brief on many occasions, and we talked about all the topics we spoke to the President about.
But nothing relating to matters that could have compromised the security of the United States.
Sir, I can't recall every conversation that I had with General Flynn during that time period.
We're going to ask some more about it in closed session this afternoon. Admiral Rogers, let me ask you about a technical question that I think is particularly troubling, and that is the SS-7 question and the technology threat. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security published a lengthy study about the impact on the U.S. government of mobile phone security flaws. The report confirmed what I have been warning about for quite some time, which is the significance of cybersecurity vulnerabilities associated with the signaling system 7. The report says that the department believes, and I quote, that all U.S. carriers are vulnerable to these exploits, resulting in risks to national security, the economy, and the federal government's ability to reliably execute national security functions. These vulnerabilities can be exploited by criminals, terrorists, and nation-state actors and foreign intelligence organizations. Do you all share the concerns of the Department of Homeland Security's Department about the severity of these vulnerabilities, and what ought to be done right now to get the government and the private sector to be working together more clearly and in a coherent plan to deal with these monumental risks? These are risks that we are going to face with terrorists and hackers and threats, and I think the Federal Communications Commission has been treading water on this, and I'd like to see what you want to do to really take charge of this and deal with what is an enormous vulnerability to the security of this country.
Sure, I share the concern. It's a widely deployed technology in the mobile segment. I share the concern. The Department of Homeland Security, in their role, kind of is the lead federal agency associated with cyber and support from the federal government to the private sector as overall responsibility here. We are trying to provide at the National Security Agency our expertise to help generate insights about the nature of the vulnerability, the nature of the problem. Partnering with DHS, talking to the private sector. There's a couple specific things from a technology standpoint that we're looking at in multiple forms that the government has created, partnering with the private sector. I'm not smart, I apologize, about all of the specifics of the DHS effort. I can take that for the record if you'd like.
All right. I just want to respond before we break to Senator Cotton's comments with respect to Section 702. Mr. Director, glad to see my tax reform partner back in this role. You know, Mr. Director, that I think it's critical the American people know how many innocent, law-abiding Americans are being swept up in the program. The argument that producing an estimate of the number is in itself a violation of privacy is, I think, a far-fetched argument. It has been made for years. I and others who believe that we can have security and liberty, that they're not mutually exclusive, have always believed that this argument that you're going to be invading people's privacy doesn't add up. We have to have that number. Are we going to get it? Are we going to get it in time so we can have a debate that shows that those of us who understand there are threats coming from overseas, and we support the effort to deal with those threats as part of 702, that we are not going to have Americans' privacy rights indiscriminately swept up. We need that number. When will we get it?
Senator, as you recall, during my confirmation hearing, we had this discussion. I promised to you that I would, if confirmed, and I was, go out to NSA, meet with Admiral Rogers, try to better understand why it was so difficult to come to a specific number. I did go out to NSA. It was hosted by Admiral Rogers. We spent significant time talking about that. And I learned the complexity of reaching that number. I think the statements that had been made by Senator Cotton are very relevant statements as to that. Clearly, what I have learned is that a breach of privacy has to be made against American people, have to be made in order to determine whether or not they've breached privacy. So there is an anomaly there. There are issues of duplication. I know that we're underway in terms of setting up a time with this committee, I believe in June, as early as June, to get into that issue and to address that and talk through the complexity of why it's so difficult to say this is specifically when we can get you the number and what the number is. So I believe we are committed to a special meeting with the committee to try to go through this particular issue. But I cannot give you a date because an end number because I understand the complexity of it now and why it's so difficult for Admiral Rogers to say this specific number is the number.
I'm well over my time. The point really is privacy advocates and technologists say that it's possible to get the number. If they say it and the government is not saying it, something is really out of sync. You've got people who want to work with you. We must get on with this and to have a real debate about 702 that ensures that security and liberty are not mutually exclusive. We have to have that number. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator King, I understand you had a...
Thank you, Senator. If this hearing had been held 2 weeks ago, we'd be spending the last 2 hours talking about North Korea. And I think we ought to pay some attention to that. Director Pompeo and Director Cardillo, could you give us an update on the North Korea situation, the nature of the threat, whether some of the pressure that we were feeling 2 and 3 and 4 weeks ago has relieved? Is there anything going on that should either concern or make us feel better about that situation? Director Pompeo.
Senator, I don't see anything that should make any of us feel any better about this threat. We have a threat from flashpoints that something could spark and have a conventional war, right? Wholly apart from the issues we talk about with ICBMs and nuclear. It's a well-armed adversary that our Department of Defense works hard to make sure and mitigate against. Those risks remain. The leader continues to develop, test, attempt to verify, not only in the launches that we see, many of which have failed, but learned from each one, but continues to develop software that improves day by day. This threat is very real. We should not focus simply on the ICBMs either. American interests are held at risk today by shorter range missiles in theater. Enormous American assets.
Seoul is held at risk by artillery.
Seoul is held at risk. We have enormous American interests in and around the region in Seoul. So no, I wouldn't say that in spite of the fact that it has fallen out of the headlines for the moment, that there's any decreased risk associated with the threat from Kim Jong-un.
There were some discussions after, again, about 2 weeks ago of entering into some kind of discussions with the North Koreans. Can you report anything on that front?
Sir, there are none that I'm aware of related to trying to talk Kim Jong-un away from his nuclear missile program. We have taken action inside the agency. I've stood up a Korean Mission Center to draw the best minds, the most innovative, creative people from across our agency, and I'm sure we'll have others join in from across the intelligence community to try and focus this effort so that we can get back on our front foot with respect to foreign intelligence collection against the North Koreans and the capacity to impact what Kim Jong-un is actually doing.
On that latter point, would you agree that the path to influence is through China?
I think it's among our most productive paths and one that I know the President's committed to working as a Secretary Tillerson.
Thank you very much. Admiral Rogers,
Senator King.
Yes. Yes, please.
Just chime in. I was in front of you in closed session a couple of weeks ago, giving you great detail about the threat you've just highlighted. What you'll hear this afternoon is just the continuation of what I was briefing a couple of weeks ago. So I would agree with the director that this threat has not only been sustained, it's continued to grow.
Because it's fallen out of the headlines doesn't mean it's not.
That's correct.
There.
It's still our highest priority.
It is the highest priority, one of the highest, if not the highest priority of the intelligence community at this time. A great deal of effort is being spent relative to how we can even better assess the situation and provide all the relevant intelligence to our policymakers.
Thank you. Two final questions. Admiral Rogers, the reason I was late this morning, we had a very informative hearing in Armed Services on cyber with Jim Clapper and Admiral Stavridis and General Hayden. The upshot of that hearing was we still don't have a doctrine. We still don't have a policy. We still don't really fully understand. You would concur, I assume, that cyber is one of the most serious threats we face.
Yes, sir.
And do we need to have a policy and a deterrent policy and something further than what we have now, which is kind of an ad hoc response to events?
Right. It tends to be a case-by-case basis. Yes, sir. I agree. And we spoke about that when I testified before the SASC last week, as a matter of fact. With you.
And Senator McCabe said, what's the impediment? Why can't we get there? Is it the structure of our government? We've got too many people thinking about this. What is it going to take to get us to the point of having a doctrine that will guide us in this incredibly important era? We are seeing the nature of warfare change before our eyes.
Sir, I don't have an easy answer for you. My role in life, not speaking now as a director of NSA, but as the commander of the United States Cyber Command, is to be the operational commander. So I don't develop policy. I play a role on the doctrine side, trying to provide an operational perspective.
Well, I hope from your position, though, you would be poking
yes,
the
sir.
administration and everyone you can think of, because
Yes, sir.
I do not want to go home to Maine and say, well, we talked a lot about this, but we didn't do anything. And when the electric system went down, we might have been able to prevent it.
Yes, sir.
Director Pompeo, final question. Do you think that Russian activity in the 2016 election was a one-off?
No, sir.
This is a continuing threat, is it not?
Yes, sir.
And things that they learned in this election, they're going to apply in 2018, 2020, and beyond.
Yes, sir, and I hope we learn from it as well, and we'll be able to more effectively defeat it.
And I believe that's why the work of this committee and others is so important, because we've got to understand what they did, how they did it, so that we can deal with it in the future. Would you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would.
Thank you very much.
Senator King, if I could just add to that, I think making this as transparent as possible, not only to our own public, but throughout democratic nations that are facing this threat. The more we inform our people of what the Russians are trying to do and how they're trying to impact our thinking and our decisions relative to how we want to be governed and what kind of democratic institutions that we want to preserve, the better. So my hope is the Russians have overstepped here to the point where people will say we absolutely have to do something about it, and we absolutely have to prevent deterrent efforts in place as well as potentially offensive efforts.
Well, I think your point about open hearings and education is incredibly important. You and I were in the Ukraine and Poland just about a year ago, and what they told us over there was that the best defense, they can't shut down their TV networks, they can't turn off the internet. The best defense is if the public knows what's happening and they say, oh, it's just the Russians again. And we have to reach that level of knowledge in this country. So I completely agree and hope that as much of our work as possible can be done in open hearing. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator King. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you all for your service.